But then I start thinking to myself, where the am I right now? Like, what is this room? And I start trying to reverse engineer how I got there. And I'm like, no, I'm not in this room. I'm in the check unit meditating right now. I feel that rolling, buzzing sensation that Monroe is describing, like, very intensely, very, very intensely. I try to move. It's like so intense that I'm like, whoa, feels weird. I try to move, brother. My physical body doesn't move, and my non-physical body lifts off completely.
Wow.
I completely start lifting off.
Dang.
And I just am this rushing, buzzing energy.
How did he discover the form of the good and what it is?
Well, we can't really, because it's like the most impossible question to answer, but we can start to flirt with it.
I'm really good at asking impossible to answer questions.
Yeah. So
all right, we are rolling, and I'm here with my good friend Michael Phillip. Once again, how's it going this morning, man?
I am doing just fine, my brother. Always a pleasure to do a meld mind. Maybe not. Maybe I have Dane Bramage this morning.
Yeah, man. Well, it's always an honor to have you. We always get into some amazing stuff, so I'm excited to get this going. And we've got some really amazing topics kind of on the list today. Just to give the listeners a quick overview of what we may get into is the Monroe Institute, the form of the good, and as well potentially UFOs, aliens. There's been a lot of sightings lately. That's a bunch of good stuff. So hopefully that gives you guys a teaser to stick around, and I'm excited to get into it. But so you had just went to the Monroe Institute.
Yep.
And you kind of stayed offline for like a week while you were there. And I did hear a little bit about what happened there on one of your recent podcasts, but I was curious to learn more. But, how was your experience? And generally, how did you discover the Monroe Institute?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can go deep into the lore if you want, and how, what it is, how it came to be, of course, what my experience was. You want me to just go for the entire
Let's do it, because
lineage?
I don't know a ton about it. I mean, I know a little bit, but I would be stoked to learn more.
Okay, so it all starts with like the titular figure, Robert Monroe. He's this guy he was a wealthy broadcasting executive, middle-aged, not a philosopher, not into consciousness, not into psychedelics, not into nothing. Pretty straight-laced guy. Just straight-laced, successful middle-aged guy. At night, he started having these weird sensations in his body that were concerning him. Like, he thought he had health issues, was feeling like vibrations and sort of like electricity sort of like shooting through his abdomen, like sweeping through his body. And he thought he was having like a cardiac episode, or maybe, I don't know, like a stroke or something. And by the way, I should say this story is all chronicled in his first book, Journeys Out of the Body, which is a really good read, or fun listen. And so he goes to a doctor, and he's good friends with his doctor, and is telling him what's going on. They run a bunch of tests, and his doctor says, like, you know what, man? Like, I want you to smoke fewer cigarettes. I want you to get your blood pressure down, but you didn't have a heart attack. Like, there's nothing overt wrong with you. So far as I can tell, you're not dying. Like, this isn't going to kill you, whatever it is.
Right.
So long story short, he eventually decides to, he had been breaking himself out of this. Like, when it would happen, he would just like get out of bed, get up, go get a drink of water, whatever, try to dispel the whole thing. So he decides one night, like, I'm just going to go into it. I'm just going to see what happens if I let this happen. But then he dozes off. And the next thing he knows, he's having this weird dream with like this crystalline sort of like vision, like right in his face. And he's just like, oh, this is a, weird dream. And then slowly he realizes, wait a minute, this is my chandelier on my ceiling. And he feels like this, like he feels this barrier. He's like, that's my ceiling. And then he turns around and he sees himself on his own bed, sleeping next to his wife. And he starts to just freak out. And he realizes like he's out of his body basically.
Right.
And he decides, or he just freaks out. He wants to get back in his body as quickly as possible. So he struggles to do that, eventually gets back in his body, very scared by the whole thing, but also intrigued. And to just greatly nutshell it, he goes on to explore this state vastly, has hundreds and hundreds of out-of-body experiences, very meticulously takes notes, makes journal entries out of it, and then eventually writes this book, Journeys Out of the Body, where he goes into all of these remarkable experiences that completely upends his life, changes his view of reality. And there's some really interesting philosophical takeaways from that book too. But so he becomes this guy because of this book. He becomes this out-of-body guy, and because of his credentials as being a pretty straight-laced, and he's a pretty scientific thinker. Like his father was some kind of professor. I don't remember what kind. So he approached all this stuff very scientifically, very like almost journalistically. Yeah. Not like you and I, where we want to just get immediately into the metaphysical and philosophical and like spiritual speculation. Like he's interested in that stuff, but he wants to understand it scientifically. So again, just fast forwarding immensely, this eventually leads to him creating technologies to assist in achieving altered states of consciousness, and then eventually also creating the Monroe Institute itself. So this technology is called HemiSync. People may have heard of this, or the gateway process. It's kind of gotten this whole reputation online. But what it really is it's a binaural beat-based technology where you can achieve these slower-moving brain frequencies that help you achieve deeper states of consciousness, more meditative states of consciousness that you can achieve naturally, but it takes a lot of practice. And these technologies help you get there more quickly, and they help you maintain that state of consciousness more regularly. And there's more to it than just the binaural beats. There's some guidance. There's some other sonic effects going on. And then there's a whole system, and you can stop me at any point here, but there's a whole system associated with this too, where they find that certain frequencies, certain combinations of sounds seem to lead fairly reliably to different states. And they develop this whole thing called focus levels. So the first major focus level you practice is focus 10, then focus 12, then focus 15, then focus 21. Each one of these, so focus 10, they call mind awake, body asleep. Pretty much just what it sounds like. You get into this very, very relaxed state, but your mind is completely awake. Focus 12 is expanded awareness, they call it. It feels much more energetic, much more buzzy. From my memory, you start to do some of these like second body type exercises in Focus 12 for the first time. Focus 15 is like a timeless void type of consciousness. And then Focus 21, they call the bridge between worlds. And there's, all kinds of phenomenology associated with that one that people may or may not experience. So
when he was like developing these, was he getting like his brain scanned and seeing like the different theta, beta, delta, all these kind of wave states, like, and then that's how he was able to build the technology?
Yeah. They would do the whole thing where they would hook you up to EEGs, and then he had a lot of different people come through. His later books get into, I'm working my way through the second book. So my broad overview of the history is pretty clear, but the specifics on how at what stages all of this stuff happened is a little bit foggy. But generally, they're definitely looking at brain waves. They're looking at and a lot of just actual experimentation with people, and like reports from people communicating with people while they're in these states.
Interesting. So, when you say these different numbers like 10 and 12 and 15, why are they kind of farther apart? Were there ones that were abandoned, or my understanding is that
So I do think like so one is just considered to be waking normal consciousness. I did see that there is a practice with like Focus 3 or something that's like this introductory thing that you can do. We didn't do that. So I don't know if there's literally a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and they just skipped over them, or what exactly, or why they chose those numbers. I do recall hearing or reading that it's somewhat arbitrary. And it's definitely not like 21 is better than 10, but it's like, it is a progression. So it is like this, it's almost like, is do better than fa on the musical scale? Like, do, re, mi? Like, no, they're just different.
Sure.
And they contextualize one another through their relationship. And what's interesting is, fast forwarding a bit into my own experimentation with it, is your consciousness obviously is this whole subtle, when you're in a meditative state, it's this whole subtle kind of ocean of possibilities, right? Of thoughts, of feelings, and then when you get through that initial kind of atmosphere of thoughts and feelings, it's this very kind of serene sort of mindscape where things can pop in and out. You can have visuals, you can have a sense of motion a little bit. But when you start to apply these almost like musical scales of consciousness, you develop somewhat of a new kind of fluency. And this new kind of fluency, you really do feel. It's interesting, like, because the way the retreat itself worked, I'm skipping way ahead here, but each day you would do a different focus level, basically. So the whole first day, focus 10, the whole second day, focus 12. Moving from state to state, up and down through those states was really interesting, because you do feel a difference. You do feel this whole qualitative, subjective difference in what it's doing to your consciousness. So yeah, it's definitely unique, and it works.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I was just Googling John C. Lilly's state of consciousness chart. I wasn't able to pull it up just yet, but I do recall, and I wonder, is there any correlation, like with the brainwave states that the Monroe Institute is working with what other people are finding? Sometimes I always wonder, is this like a science that other people with completely different methods of exploring consciousness, can they hit on the same benchmarks and hit on the same states and record them scientifically? Because he was using like isolation tanks and ketamine and stuff. But this guy's using the Hemi sync. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And so it's a binaural beat based technology, which I have used binaural beats, and it does do something funny by like putting different frequencies in both sides of your head. And I guess it makes your brain freak out a little and not know what to do. And so like, is that right?
The idea is that, so if you want to entrain your brain with a tone that's a very low oscillation, you, as you know from music production, the audible spectrum is what it is. You can't actually hear that frequency. So if you want to hear an 8 hertz frequency, you can't. So if you want to entrain your brain with an 8 hertz frequency, what you need to do is play 100 in one ear and 108 in the other ear, basically. And then the brain somehow does, there's a mechanism that I'm forgetting the name of, but it synthesizes the difference between those two. And then you somehow end up with an 8 hertz entrainment between the two hemispheres.
Wow.
So yeah, that's the basic idea.
It's math, right?
Yeah, to a degree, yeah.
You're kind of doing math trick on your brain.
Right. Yeah.
Frequency math trick.
Yeah. And so even though he wasn't really in the philosophical scene to start with, once Monroe gets active with this stuff, I believe the first group of people that he ever publicly goes and trains are at Esalen Institute out in Big Sur, which is like very famous for being this intellectual hub for all of these, thinkers in the psychedelic movement, the Eastern philosophy movement, a who's who just went through there. Terrence McKenna, Ram Dass, Alan Watts, Joseph Campbell, Richard Tarnas, who became this famous intellectual who's still around now, helped run the place for a long time. Stan Grof, just all these people went through there. So he does eventually get hooked in with a lot of different people. So he may be aware of John Lilly. I don't know for sure if they ever overlapped, but I would not be surprised.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Okay. Also, quickly, have you been to Esalen, or are you planning to go?
No.
I feel like I've heard.
I would love
talk
to
about it.
No, I would love to go there. It's such an iconic place, but no, I haven't.
Yeah. Yeah. These institutes are so fascinating. But I guess I wonder what drew you before maybe you dived into all the books and the background. What drew you to be excited to go? Like, like something piqued your interest, like, oh, I'm really drawn to this institute, this idea. How did that story unfold?
Well, I mean, there's a few components to it. Like, generally, I think, my disposition, maybe people who have heard our previous conversations know that I'm just interested in consciousness. Like, I want to understand it. And I do a lot of intellectual and conversational masturbation about consciousness, but that's intellectualizing about it is different than primarily exploring it and diving in. Obviously, for me, psychedelics have been a huge tool in that respect. I have meditated. Sometimes I've had pretty long streaks of meditating, but it's always like, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes tops. I've never done a really deep dive, like meditate like it's your full-time job for like a chunk of time.
Sure.
So that idea was attractive to me, but then also there's all this mystique about the Monroe Institute, man. Like if you, you look deeper into the lore, one of the things I didn't get into yet is most people know this gateway process, quote unquote, because of the CIA tie-in. Do you know about that?
You know what? I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. I know a little bit about that. The CIA researched states of consciousness. They wanted to maybe try remote viewing, this type of thing.
Yeah.
But tell me about that.
Yeah. So to set the stage, this is during the Cold War, right? US and Russia, there's just all these crazy operations going on both sides. The US is aware of the fact that psychic spies are being used by Russia, by the USSR.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh shit, we need to understand this. Like we need to have our own ops going on here.
Yeah.
So they start this whole effort, which ends up having all these different names, like Project Grill Flame. The one that most people know is Project Stargate. Project Stargate, long story short, assembles this team of remote viewing psychic spies. The most famous one is this guy, now at least, is this guy, Joe McMoneagle. And he's still alive. I think he's the only member of the original group that's still alive now. But anyway, they are remote viewing, and they're doing this stuff for years. So remote viewing, it's important to distinguish, is a totally different technique than what Monroe is doing. Monroe personally at this point is not involved in this. But as an offshoot of that, they become aware of this Robert Monroe guy, his reports of being able to go out of body, and they want to know, basically, is there efficacy for us here? Like, what can we use this? So the CIA essentially starts a study, and they send this guy, what's his name? Let me find his name quick.
Also, it's reminding me that for listeners who are interested in this, there's a film called The Men Who Stare at Goats.
It's a hatchet job, though. It's essentially making fun of this whole thing, and this is very.
It's more serious
real
than
shit.
Got it. Okay.
Where is it? Okay, Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonnell. Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonnell is the guy who does this study, and he approaches it very seriously. Like, so this whole document now is declassified. It's on the CIA's website, with the exception of a missing page. The missing page is also out there. And it's honestly, it's one of the few times where there's this, mysterious missing page of a report, and it actually brings the goods, dude.
Oh, nice.
It gets into holographic universe theory and this idea that we're all manifestations of what they call the absolute, like the one consciousness. Yeah, man, it's really interesting. So it gets into the practical elements of using this. It gets into the theoretical stuff, some of the philosophy of consciousness stuff, some of expanding upon like why this works. Like I said, these like big metaphysical questions about the nature of reality. This paper gets into all of this stuff.
Wow.
So it's a bit of a read, but it's pretty fucking interesting. And it begs all these questions about, like, I get the practical parts of it, but also why is the CIA interested in like all of this more far-flung, pretty esoteric stuff?
Right.
So they do that report. Lieutenant Colonel McDonnell actually does recommend, like, you should study this further. You should consider using these techniques more. I don't know if they did that. Like, it, I'm definitely, in doing all of this research I've done on it, I'm super curious if they took anything away from this, and if there is still anything having to do with this going on in intelligence agencies.
Right.
So that's the involvement, and they do describe in this report, the focus levels, the idea, how it relates to out of body potentially, so there was this CIA study. Monroe himself doesn't really seem to be too entangled in the security intelligence apparatus, but he does have some. So that guy Joe McMoneagle that I mentioned, he's probably like the most famous living remote viewer. He's very elderly now, but he and Monroe become friends. He helps to train him to remote view more efficiently and stuff like that, using the gateway protocols. So
wow.
So it's really interesting, dude. And so the institute itself is in Virginia, which obviously the state of Virginia has like a lot of ties to it, like intelligence agencies and stuff like that. So
wow.
It is interesting. It is a bit spooky, but
so they want so CIA and Monroe, like they're trying to use remote viewing to gain advantage in like a intelligence way and or a war way. Like maybe they could tell someone was planning an attack or like something like that. Is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, Joe McMoneagle has all of these. So to be clear, there is a big difference between gateway, Monroe, out of body stuff and remote viewing. It's totally different techniques. Like, you can see videos of Joe McMoneagle remote viewing. It's so fucking weird, dude. And so it's a standardized technique. It's not just like you go in your room and meditate and you try to look at some target. There's a specific way. Everything is very specific if you're doing it the air quotes real military way. So it's like your eyes are open. You have a piece of paper. He always writes like certain things in a certain order. I don't know all the steps, but he writes certain things in a certain order, and he'll be like, I'm getting an impression of this. And then he just starts drawing, and he either hits in on it or he doesn't. And when he hits in on it, it's like locked in. Like he is extremely, extremely accurate when he locks in on the target. And it's disturbing, dude. Like it's his drawings. Like there's all these pictures of McMoneagle's drawings next to the actual target. And he can draw extraordinarily detailed renderings of what he's remote viewing somehow.
Wow.
It's wild. So that technique is totally different than like, laying in isolation and like going deep into your own mind and potentially popping out of your body. But yeah, I mean, it's all extended consciousness and things that aren't supposed to be possible, but very different techniques. So anyway, yeah, I don't know to what degree fully Monroe himself gets pulled into all of this shadowy CIA stuff, but he's at least tangentially connected. But
Maybe they just researched his stuff to the very, whether or not they talked to him, they were like, let's research what he's offering, right?
That's what it seems like to me. That's exactly what it seems like to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I could go on, but I've been blathering and blathering.
Well, I guess I wonder, because I know you to be kind of a skeptical guy, but you're also very interested in a lot of these things. I mean, are you getting convincing evidence that these types of out-of-body experiences and or non-local consciousness states are real?
Yeah. Have we talked about this at all, or do you know what ends up happening to me at the retreat?
Nope. That's what I want to get to.
Okay, great. Okay. So let's get to it then.
Yeah. So you go to this retreat.
And on your point of being skeptical, it's funny because I think some people would say, you think Michael is fucking skeptical? This dude's into all this stuff. But I'm also not the type of dude to just like let the Kool-Aid woo run down my face. Like, I want to know what's real. I want to know what's fucking real. What works, what has evidence, what isn't just like subjective, self-delusion or imagination. I want to know what's real. And so the way I end up going to this retreat, by the way, is there's this YouTuber named Chris Ramsey. His main channel is huge. He does a lot of like magic and puzzle box stuff on his main channel. But then he started this new channel called Area 52. And on Area 52, he looks into a lot of UFO, remote viewing, out of body.
Yeah.
He goes there on his channel, does this whole really amazingly well-produced series on his experience. So I do a pod with him. He ends up connecting me with Monroe Institute, and that's how I end up going there and connecting with them. So I go do this gateway retreat. It's a week. It's 5 full days, like in the middle where you're doing the hard work, and then the days on each end are travel days. So the place is beautiful. It's kind of in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, outside of Charlottesville. Hadn't really been to that area before, but it's really nice.
Nice.
So, you get there, and it's funny because I think people have, if you're only consuming content about Gateway and all this stuff on YouTube, I think you have this sort of dark, esoteric, spooky feeling about what goes on there. Yeah. And it's in the back of my mind too, because I know some of the lore going in, but it's super welcoming, super comfortable, super calm kind of vibe. One thing that's interesting too, to just kind of set the stage for this whole experience is, so there's this big, I can send you some videos if you want to flash some stuff up here too, but
yeah,
there's a big open area in front of the main buildings on the property. And the main sort of landmark is they have a gigantic rose quartz crystal that's like as tall as you. It's huge. So there's people standing out. So I'm just arriving there on the travel day, and there's this woman standing, named Tanya, standing out there. I just kind of walk out there. I'm like, hey, I'm just checking out the rose quartz. We're talking. We both see this weird thing in the sky, dude, that we're like, what is that? And it sort of looks like a contrail, like that would be behind a jet, but it's like this weird, almost like crescent shape. And it's not changing shape, and it just starts like descending.
Where?
And just holds that shape until it like gets behind this mountain range. So check this out. So you think I'm skeptical. There's a dude there named Mark, who is a PhD student. He's the most skeptical person in our group. Like he's open-minded, but he's the most skeptical. She's not skeptical at all. And I'm sort of like in the middle, like, to give you an idea, she's standing there barefoot being like, I'm trying to communicate with the spirits here. And I'm trying to that's her vibe. Sure. His vibe is like, I'm a PhD student. My vibe is like, I'm open-minded. Like, we'll see, all three of us see this weird thing. From skeptic to believer, we're all like, what in the fuck is this thing?
Yeah. Then
directly after that, we start seeing this weird light in the sky that's like blinking in and out. And it's not flashing, like an airplane. It's like, it's there and it's moving like a solid light and then it just goes like and goes away. Weird. And then comes back several times, and I get both of these things on camera.
Nice.
Just weird shit. I don't see UFOs. I'm open to them existing, obviously, but I'm not the type of dude who's like, there's a UFO, there's a UFO. you know what I'm saying? Just to give people context. So that was interesting and weird.
Wow.
So with
this is day one, right?
This is day one. This is like within like 30 minutes of getting there.
Wow.
So I'm already like, all right, the synchronicities I feel like are going to be off the charts on this trip. Like the vibes are already getting interesting. And that's one thing I wish I could convey more literally is the importance of the people, because there's 26 people all hanging out in this house, and we're all very different people in terms of like vocation, age group, race, like everything, super diverse group of people. And we're all coming with our own sort of baggage, but everybody's there to do this work and, work on themselves and try to learn something about reality and whatever. And that's a huge part of it. Like that sort of like Sangha spiritual group vibe, I think is really, really important. And really, you can't recreate that just meditating on your own in a bedroom. So that's a huge part of this experience. And I can't share like too many personal details because this is like all private people on a retreat. It's not a bunch of creators, So anyway, that's a huge part of this. The trainers are a huge part of it. But I can't say too much personal stuff, obviously. But I do want to say that's like 50% of this experience. So in terms of the meditations themselves, you don't start meditating until the next full day. And as I mentioned, you spend that whole first day exploring this focus 10 state, which is the mind awake, body asleep state.
Where do you do this at the retreat?
So everybody has their own bed. They call it a check unit. And it's like a blacked out bed that has headphones in it. So
in your own room or together?
You have a shared room. So check this out. My roommate, who was randomly assigned, is a dude named Adam Butler. Adam Butler wrote Butler's Field Guide to DMT.
Oh, wow.
He's the only person at this entire retreat who knew who I was, who was like, yeah, dude, very
How
weird.
Exciting.
Yeah, another weird synchronicity of just like, okay, of all the people here, I'm roommates with this dude.
Right.
And yeah, like we have a lot in common, obviously.
That's killer. That's awesome.
Yeah. So just another weird coincidence. He was a great roommate, by the way. He's going to come on the pod, I think, too. So you're in this, like, just imagine a comfortable small bed. There's a blackout curtain, and then there's a wall, and there's like a wall at the head and a wall at the foot too. So it's just a blackout curtain. There are lights you can put on in there, but I wanted it completely dark just for, to be totally absorbed in the mind.
Yeah.
So then here's the grammar of it is like you meet with the group, you're all kind of sitting like, like you're in school together on the ground. The instructors are in the front. They're kind of preparing you, letting you know, like, all right, today we're going to do focus 10. This is focus 10. And then there's various meditations within each focus level. Like this one, we're going to see if you can connect with guidance. Like you're going to like throw some questions out into the ether and see if answers come back. Or this one, we're just going to, I don't know, it's like a free flow where there's not going to be any guidance and it's going to be just you and the tone. Like, so they give you this little bit of a contextualization. So then they always, every time they say by way of the bathrooms, meaning like, make sure you go pee before you start so you don't have to stop and go pee and ruin the whole flow.
Yeah.
Then you draw your curtain back, you get in the little spaceship, you close it, you put it on. It always starts with ocean waves. So like, then it is Bob Monroe's voice talking to you from beyond the grave. And you always do this little ritual. I can tell you what it is, but it's all stuff that you only know if you go through. Like it's energy conversion box, resonant energy balloon. You do these intoning kind of chanty things. And then you go into the meditation.
Well, how long is this intro thing and how long is like the full meditation?
It varies. So I would say like they're mostly around 40, 45 minutes. The longer ones are like an hour.
Okay. So you're kind of tuning in for like 15, and then you're like 45, or?
Maybe like so this includes the little ritual thing you do in the beginning. Okay. So just to tell you what those two things are real quick, the energy conversion box is this idea that anything that's on your mind, like anxieties, things you're worried about, you take those things and you try to vividly imagine yourself putting them in this very, like, physically taking those things and putting them in this very secure box, like closing the box and keeping them in there for the whole duration of the meditation.
Nice.
The resonant energy balloon is kind of like, it's like an aura type meditation. Like you're imagining this torus of energy flowing around you. And it's crazy, man, because you really start to be able to feel it. Like you really start to be able to feel the energy like coming into your feet, going through your body. Yeah, it's interesting.
Wow. So
you do that every time. And then for me, what was interesting is because I'm into all this esoteric stuff, I started imagining other things. Like I started, instead of just putting things in the box, I started to imagine like putting things on. Like I'm putting on an amulet of clarity. I'm putting on a ring of, wisdom or something. Like I just started imagining this stuff throughout the week.
Yeah.
Which was fun, at least.
Yeah.
There's more weird shit that I started imagining, but I won't get into all of it. But what you start to appreciate, though, is that your imagination, we orphan that thing, man. Like we don't spend, like it's running in the background all the time, but for the most part, we push it away. For the most part, we diminish it. We very, very rarely celebrate it and play in it to a point where it's like encouraged and celebrated,
Right.
And they really do that there. Like they really encourage you to go into your imagination, to use your imagination. And I was kind of resistant to that because I wanted to feel like I was contacting something outside myself, like not me generating these experiences through my, wishes or whatever. Like I wanted to connect with a daimon. I wanted to connect with like deep outside or deep inside intelligence that is not my ego, is what I really wanted.
Yeah.
But I eventually came to the realization that there's sort of a halfway point in that your imagination is like your appendage when you're in the non-physical. Like you don't have anything else other than your point of view and reaching out with imagination and reaching out with intention. So I think there's sort of this, you kind of need to get the ball rolling, and then sometimes weird shit happens.
Yeah.
So I won't go day by day here, but I do end up having some pretty impactful experiences where they're almost just like epiphanies, like micro epiphanies that just kind of hit you at once.
Yeah.
One really big one was just around imagination and this idea, like I said, about how sad it is that we orphan that, how sad it is that we push this incredible faculty that we have away, and that we're so distracted by outside input that we're just silencing that, man. We're silencing that divine part of ourselves that just is infinite potential. It's just like the source of everything.
Yeah.
And then behind that, I had some really, really deep emotional releases about darkness itself and about how we're afraid of the dark. We actively avoid the dark. But the dark is like, it is home, man. Like it is, we all came out of the dark. We'll probably all go back to the dark. Consciousness itself was probably darkness for an incalculable amount of time. If consciousness is one thing, like some real force in the universe.
Right.
And then I started thinking about, how that relates to God, and like if we're running away from darkness, or we're really running away from God in a lot of ways. And it just like all of these, it wasn't like just me thinking about it. It was just all the stuff hitting me at once, just like sitting in the bed one day. So I had moments like that. I also had really interesting, just sometimes flashes of what felt like information that was not me, just like, so when we were doing a meditation, for instance, in the Focus 15, which is supposed to be beyond time, I was thinking about Platonic forms and like thinking about things that are beyond time, right? Like these things that exist immortally, sort of embedded into the fabric of reality. So I had this idea of like, show me a Platonic form, show me a Platonic form. And I don't feel like I got that during the meditation. But then later that day, I'm coming out of a meditation and I had these, I'm not kidding, dude, like these lightning flashes of like math. I don't know what it was, but it was just like boom, 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 kind of like mind's eye flashes of equations. And I couldn't, it was too fast for me to even have a chance at writing them down. But I definitely saw it. And I was definitely like, I don't know what the fuck that was. So just weird, weird stuff like that make you wonder if, the esotericists, the Platonists, the Hermeticists are onto something when they talk about this idea of like, you're connected to this logos, to this divine logic, and you can wake up to that. Interesting stuff.
It makes me think the imagination might be our link to the divine, the higher realms, the higher self. Is that the kind of vibe you were getting?
Yeah. I mean, the imagination, the psyche in general. I think when we're metacognitive, like when we're thinking about from our ego POV of Matt, Michael, there are major limitations. And when you get into these deeply meditative states where you start to really brush up against like that POV existing and that POV ceasing to exist in a state like, for example, that we would normally call sleep, you get much better, even in a week, at holding on to these states that are like right between like, here's where Matt or Michael is, and here's where I just go into the ocean of consciousness. And I think that it's this thing that I call sleep or dream. But you start to see it's like, oh, it's like a shoreline. As soon as I go past this point, I won't know who I am or what I am or where I am anymore, but I will still be. I just won't have that perspective anymore. So you spend much more time in these states that we would probably only transit going to sleep for like a snap of a finger and then you're just unconscious. You would just hang out in those states. And I think that it kind of changed my understanding of what sleep is, of what consciousness is, or it's capable of. So there are some people on this retreat who badly want to have a classical O.B.E. Like they've been reading his books, Bob Monroe's books. They've been doing crazy shit at night to try to like wake themselves up, go back to sleep, just mess with the knobs and levers in such a way that you get separation. They tell you at the beginning of the retreat, if that's why you're here, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Maybe 5% of you will have a real O.B.E., but that's not why we're here. We're here to understand our consciousness. We're here to explore. We're here to wake you up to this idea that you're more than your physical body. That's the one piece of dogma that they have there is like, you are more than your physical body. That's one thing in the ritual of the meditations I forgot to mention is you always have this mantra of, I'm more than my physical body. Because I'm more than my physical body, I can explore non-physical states, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So that's the real purpose of the retreat.
Interesting.
So anyway, we're on the final day of the retreat. Not a single person has had an O.B.E. We have kind of an intense day because we do a long, silent, meditative walk. And then we go straight into a meditation called Superflow. That's the longest meditation of the whole retreat. It's over an hour. You go from focus 10 all the way to focus 21 and then back down. So it's probably like the most intense, I would say, sequence of the retreat. So I'm having just a really good day this day. Like, it just feels like I'm so relaxed in the meditation. I just feel like I'm floating down this sort of black velvety, mildly geometric kind of, mind's eye type stuff.
Yeah.
Just super relaxed, super disassociated from my body to the point where my body's almost numb. Which is surprisingly easy to achieve, actually. Once you've done these meditations, like, you can do a focus 10 or 12 and really almost feel like you don't have hands or feet or anything. So I'm just enjoying it. Like, I don't have any huge expectations for this meditation, other than I'm just enjoying it and going through it.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, my POV completely changes, dude, to being just in the darkness and just so chill that I'm almost like not even in my body, to I am in a room physically and I'm looking out a window.
Wow.
And it's as real as you and I sitting here right now. I'm looking out this window and it's like a wooded scene outside. And I have this sort of like faint sense of maybe kind of beige walls and like maybe a piece of art of a Japanese crane on the wall is like what I remember. But then I start thinking to myself, where the fuck am I right now? Like, what is this room? And I start trying to reverse engineer how I got there. And I'm like, no, I'm not in this room. I'm in the check unit meditating right now. As soon as I have that thought, Matt, I'm just back laying there again. But I feel that rolling, buzzing sensation that Monroe is describing, like, very intensely, very, very intensely. I try to move. It's like so intense that I'm like, whoa, this feels weird. I try to move, brother. My physical body doesn't move and my non-physical body lifts off completely.
Wow.
I completely start lifting off.
Damn.
And I just am this rushing, buzzing energy, and it starts to like float above my body. And it's scary, dude. It is. It's legitimately scary. It's surreal as fuck, but it's very real. Like, again, it's as real as me talking to you right now. You're 100% metacognitive, like aware. Just like, again, you're fully awake. It's not like, oh, maybe this is a dream. No, it's as real as this.
Wow.
The sensations, though, it's like you still feel like you have a body for sure. And it's so weird how almost exactly like you would think it is, it really is. I thought maybe it would look psychedelic, like I'd be in like this different version of reality where there's just like fractals, and no, it just feels like you're in the room that you're in and you're this energetic vibration, but it's body shaped, basically.
Wow.
So I start trying to move, and it's just not working well. I'm like, I'm moving my hand. It feels very slow, very just like foreign, and just like, what in the fuck? And I had, like I said, I watched Chris's videos. I had done some research, and one of the things they say is like, you've got to focus, like mentally focus on what you want. And then that's how you move. That's how you do things. That's how you travel.
Wow.
So I start really being like, move. And it's just not going well, dude, at all. So then I start having the thought of, well, at least try to turn over and look at your physical body and have that freak out, because that's like a big goal. But again, I'll remind you, it's like blackout dark in the check unit. So you can't really see much anyway. I don't succeed in turning over. And then I start to just like basically panic. And I just want it to be over, because I don't know how to describe it other than like the feeling of, let's say you're diving underwater and you're like running out of breath or something. And it's just like, you're good. Like, you're not going to drown. Like, let's say, you can hold your breath for a minute, but like 20 seconds in, your body's like screaming for air. It just, there's something in you that's like, this is not right. Like, go, you need to get back into your body right now. And that's overwhelming me at this point. I'm like, I need to get back in. I'm done. Like, this is crazy, but I just need to get back in. So I just start saying the word help, like, and I can only do it kind of quietly, like, help. I just start doing that. And I just start to feel myself like get pulled back in.
Yeah.
And then I'm back in. I have just this charge going through my whole body now. Like I'm just like, almost feel like I've been telling everyone, it feels almost like if you ever get rear-ended and you're like just sitting in your car and you're like, whoa, and you get rear-ended and then you just have this buzz. It's like that. And I just got out of the check unit and went downstairs and was so freaked out. And it was just kind of, and everyone's still meditating at this point because the meditation's still going. And I'm just sitting in this chair, basically just doing this.
Yeah.
Like just shaking my head being like, what the fuck, dude? That's real. That's real. Like,
right.
So it happened. And that's all I can say is that is something that can really happen to you. And
right.
It's as real as anything I've experienced, dude.
That's wild. You know, I haven't really had this experience, but I've heard many people report sleep paralysis. It sounds a little similar. What do you think?
Well, I think that, so there's two skepticisms that are always thrown at this, which is like, how do you know you're not dreaming? How do you know this isn't a lucid dream? I can't prove anything to anyone. I only know what I experienced. But Robert Monroe's perspective is that we're all going out of body every night in an unconscious way.
Yeah.
And that it's not as foreign as we think it is. What's really foreign is that the conscious mind does not go to that realm. The conscious mind stays asleep, but it's like you're becoming, you could look at it as either being so adept at staying in these states where you normally can't stay there, or I kind of feel like the second thing I'm about to say is what it seemed like to me. You're playing with those knobs and levers of consciousness so much that eventually you get the streams just kind of like out of sync. And in getting them out of sync, it's like you bring that conscious mind back online when the energy body is still doing something else. And so my question is my counter question to that criticism is, are you sure sleep paralysis is what you think it is? Or are you sure at least certain kinds of dreaming are what you think they are? Because maybe we've just been so trained to think that, and let me use nuance here. I think that there are some dreams that are quote unquote just dreams, but I think there are some other dreams, in air quotes, that are not just dreams and are potentially, at least, this second body or this part of the psyche that is doing something.
Yeah.
In air quotes, somewhere in air quotes.
Yep.
And all I can say, really, for sure, is that I had that experience.
Yeah.
It felt as real as anything I've ever experienced. And it would be disingenuous for me to say that I could chalk it up to only some mundane explanation. So I don't know, man. I mean, there's a lot of open questions, and I certainly don't even feel the need to convince anyone. All I can say is that I promise you could have that, to anyone listening, you could have that experience. And I would challenge you to dismiss it as a mundane, you're just dreaming.
Absolutely. And also it comes to mind that I've heard tons of reports through documentaries and YouTube YouTube videos about people popping out during surgery.
Yes.
So they're, anesthetized, if I said that the right way. They're anesthetized. So they put you under to a low state of consciousness so that you don't feel that they're going to chop into you, right? But they have that experience, almost the same one you had, where they like pop out of their body. They can hear the conversations. They can see what people were doing when their eyes are clearly closed. And they can come out and say, I heard you talking about this, this, and this. Right. I saw you do this, this, and this. And the doctors are like, what the fuck? Because you were out,
Yep.
So
that's an important. Yeah, that's an important point. Is like NDEs, anesthesia, out of body. That's the holy grail, I think, on the individual level. witness something objectively that I could not have seen with my physical body, and then verify that that was real. And there are so many, I haven't had that happen. There are so many stories, though, to your point, about that happening. Actually, interestingly, maybe not coincidentally, just down the road from Monroe Institute is University of Virginia. They have done the most peer-reviewed research on NDEs there and all that reincarnation stuff, which you may have heard about. Dr. Jim Tucker, he's an MD there. He's the one who's done like all that past life research on children who really like do accurately, objectively remember things from a previous life. And they exhaustively catalog this stuff, and they remove all but the most compelling stories. So there is real peer-reviewed evidence out there, and it might clash with some people's worldview, man, but it's subjected to the same scientific bar that everything else is. So it seems like it is a real thing.
Yeah. I think it's real, you know, like dreams. Some of them, like you said, maybe just are dreams, but there is a reason for most of our biological functions. They're trying to do some type of homeostasis where they're trying to get a message sometimes to you that you're not willing to accept in your base state of consciousness while you're awake. It's stuff that, you know, essentially you have like a bias or a blind spot. I've gotten deep messages around certain things that could only come in dreams where I'm disarmed or something. Yeah. It's funny how like, our brain is so intelligent that it is keeping track of shit that even our conscious mind can't. And it'll tell you these messages. And to circle back also to like, you know, disassociating from the body with sleep paralysis, with anesthesia, with, you know, even psychedelics. At a point, you can leave the body. DMT is very famously known for doing that. Higher doses of ketamine is known for doing that. Higher doses of LSD, you know, you can, I don't know if I've had that experience with LSD, but certainly DMT and ketamine, I've had those experiences of, it's like, I'm not in my body, I'm in space somewhere. You know? And it just reminds me of that. And again, these medicines just open up a gateway for things that we're already capable of doing. They just put our brain in a more susceptible state, I think. So returning to the Monroe Institute, it sounds like you came away with like an experience that you now have like I don't know if conviction is too strong of a word, but that out-of-body experiences are possible. Is that right?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I have a real experience, and I don't, at the end of the day, man, I cannot prove what it is or what it isn't, or if it's like if it has a mundane explanation or it doesn't. I can't prove anything about anything that I'm experiencing or doing or what's real or not real. But I know for a fact that is as real as anything as I've ever experienced. My body and mind and heart all think that was real, you know?
Yeah, right.
That's what I can say. And, you know, there's a whole, I'm going to make a video about this whole experience. And
nice.
At the outset, I mean, a very obvious question is, what if you could prove to yourself that you are more than your physical body? Not an idea, not I really vibe with this. No. And like knowing an experience that you're more than your physical body, an experience you didn't achieve, you know, as much of a proponent and believer in psychoactive molecules as I am for doing deep work and potentially exploring reality. There's always going to be that little thing in the mind that's like, hey, you're on drugs.
Right.
What if you could do that without drugs? And that's, you know, part of my impetus for this experience too. And I would love to tell you that I proved it to myself. And in some sense, I do think I proved it to myself. Right. But there's always a defense. There's always well, I don't know. It could have been this. It could have been that. but I think I'm as close to proving it to myself as I'm going to get beyond doing like what I described before, where you got a little piece of paper hidden in a drawer down in San Antonio and I fucking go remote view that shit. Like that's another layer of proof that I guess I could achieve. But short of that, I feel like I've come as close to proving it to myself as I can prove.
Right.
Which is crazy. I mean, it's weird because it's like, it's such a one-off experience, you know, Matt, like, you know what this is like, because you've had some extremely far-flung states of consciousness, and then you come back, and then you're taking a shit, and you're like, you know, procrastinating, and you're like smoking too much, and you're like back in the mundane throes. But then in the back of your mind, like, you know that you had that other experience, and it's that same thing where it's just like, all right, that's out there. That's out there, you know.
It is, you know. And the hardest part about all of this for most psychonauts is the integration and hanging up the phone when you get the message, because the states are so alluring, so fascinating, so making life worth living to me. Because before I was depressed and I was on the verge of suicidal things, at least wondering, would anyone miss me, right? Type of shit. But this made me feel like, yo, I'm not here just to be alive. I'm here to explore. I'm here to like see what this life has to offer, to see all of it, all of the stuff this life has to offer. And so it is something that, people can get very attracted to, and it can help a lot of people. Honestly, some people really need to step outside of themselves.
Yes.
You know, like people with PTSD that have been to war, who smoke cannabis all day because it helps them. I don't think it's hurting them in that case. But when you have all your, some people shouldn't be smoking cannabis all day. Like they've got everything before them and they're just kind of wasting it. So it's circumstantial. Yeah. It's circumstantial. Before we jump into the form of the good, like, is there any kind of final thoughts on Monroe, your general kind of like review of the experience, and maybe where people could learn more about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's always like things I could criticize or things I wish were different or whatever, but overall it was a really wonderful experience, and it's a great place for actually doing the work in a non-dogmatic way that's very tolerant of a lot of different ideas, that isn't going to demand anything from you. Like there's no even with like a psychedelic retreat, like getting off your meds and like, you know, all the other things that could block you from doing that. There's almost nothing other than psychological, like pretty significant psychological issues that would block you from doing something like this. And I think by virtue of what we're talking about, that life is like this, you've got to just get things on the calendar. Like, I mean, there's many ways to do it. I'm not like part of like some cult telling you have to go to Monroe or something. But what that place gives you is a method, technology that they've used on thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Like I said, a non-dogmatic space to really go deep into your own mind, to really explore, to really do work that, yes, you could go download all of these or a bunch of these meditations and go lay in your bed and do the work, and it would be profound. But can you really do it as fully as you would at a retreat, as you could with like dozens of other people who are all reinforcing you and like holding the space and supporting you to like, because make no mistake, there were many tears shed in that group, so many laughs, like so many things you cannot replicate on your own. And I could never replicate again, even if I go do another retreat, can't replicate that first one. So by virtue of the way that life is now, I think you've got to do things like this, where you are taking chunks of time that are just dedicated to doing the deep work. Because if you're not doing that, you're probably only going fairly shallow. I mean, that's been my experience at least. But
I'll say something on that, which is for myself in the past, when I would do yoga retreats, they were like boot camps for the lifestyle.
Right.
And then you can come back home and be like, well, what did I do there? What did I eat there? What did I do at this time there? Now I have a model for the days instead of just like doing my best. Like you get the actual experience, the schooling of, okay, I'm 100% here. It's not like I didn't check my phone. I did, but I'm 100% here. I'm according to their schedule until like they say go to bed.
Right.
And then now I have my little like hour of jollies, like texting my girlfriend or whatever. But yeah, like it does give you that boot camp experience. And that's probably why they put soldiers in boot camp, is like, this is how you need to live to be an effective soldier. Wake up at this time, do these push-ups, do this run, eat this shit, build your team, your comradeship with these guys, because you're going to fucking go to war with them and blah, blah, blah. So I think that's where like a Monroe Institute would come into play for people who want to like study out of body. Is like, okay, well, if I want to do that, this is the model that one of the best schools in America, if not the world, is using for that type of thing.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Just get yourself whatever you decide to do. Like, I think it's definitely worth finding a chunk of time, a reputable place with good people who have good intentions. It's worth doing. It's worth doing.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, on our last podcast, we had intended to get to the form of the good, where we were kind of discussing like Platonism and stuff, and we kind of didn't. So I would love to go there now. And essentially, you can give just like the smallest summary on who the teacher of it was, because we've talked about it a lot. But then we could get into how did he discover the form of the good and what it is.
Well, we can't really, because it's like the most impossible question to answer, but we can start to flirt with it.
I'm really good at asking impossible to answer questions.
Yeah. So I think we did talk about this, because I remember giving the whole allegory of the sun thing, or the whole simile of the sun thing. And I think that I'll probably do that again, but we can also expand on that if you want. Sure. But so even just answering the question of like, what is Platonism is difficult to do, especially in a pointed way. But what you can do is you can sort of look at this suite of ideas that were propounded by Plato himself, and then these famous Platonists who come in his wake. So one of the core ideas is that to get to the essence of reality, you need to go into the intelligible. The intelligible is essentially like the realm of mind, like the realm of direct experience. So you don't get to the root of reality by doing empirical measurements, like going out in the world, breaking things down into their parts and running experiments. Like that is important to a Platonist, but that will not get you to foundational, like what is the nature of reality. To do that, you need to go deeper into the mind and start seeing some truths for yourself. And so we can take that, and what that basically means is they are idealists. Like they believe that consciousness and then things happening within consciousness are the realer reality, and they're also the source of physical reality. So physical reality emanates from this realm of nous, which means like mind, essentially, or intellect. It's often also translated as. And then there is this logos, this order, this logic within that also emanates downward. But it's like you're losing the signal the further you get from the original source. And the physical world is actually about as far from the signal as you can be. Yet at the same time, it is imbued with that very same divine logic. And that's why mathematics work. That's why we can continuously make more and more sense of reality. We can continuously use the mind to get closer and closer to truth without ever fully arriving at the truth. So in an extremely obtuse sense, the true source of all of that wisdom is the form of the good. The form of the good is this thing that lies beyond the horizon of everything you can know and is like the sun's rays that are casting out everything that makes any level of intelligible sense. So it's kind of like saying, well, where does light come from? Or where does anything come from? And then you have to go to this just massive, impossible to even begin to try to comprehend entity that we call the sun, right? And this is essentially when Glaucon, Plato's brother in Plato's Republic, asks Socrates this question that you asked me, what is the form of the good? And we're talking about Socrates here, who is supposed to be like the sage of sages in Plato's works, right?
Yeah.
He says, I can't answer this question. It's like too big of a question. But he does say to think in terms of the sun, think in terms of what the sun does, what it is, how it shines down on this world and gives life, makes all the plants come into existence, which, it has this it just has this never ending ripple effect that basically nothing on this planet life-wise would be able to exist if it didn't exist. So its whole function is basically to radiate, to give, to nourish, and to bring light to the world so that things can be seen and understood.
Right.
So there's that graphic that I sent you, which it would be cool to flash up, which is almost like you can conceive of it as, if you keep following this chain of logic and just keep following it and keep following it and keep following it, like you could start with any object in front of you, breaking it down to its parts. Where did this book come from? Well, it was written by a guy who learned all of this stuff, and then he wrote it down. And then let's talk about the physical book. Well, the physical book, it came from a printer, and where did they get the paper? It's kind of like doing that in your mind until you get back to the initial source of everything. And it's like so mind-blowing and endless that you can't really do that. But yet logically, all of math, all of reason, all of our mind knows that you don't get something from nothing. So it all came from somewhere.
Yeah.
But that somewhere is so complicated and beyond the scope of the human intellect that it is like this great mystery of the underlying one source isness that started it all, that is still maintaining to this day, that you can't assign an age to. You can't assign a single fucking thing to it other than that it is, and it's good. That's basically what Plato and Socrates say.
Interesting.
Beyond that, you're probably doing damage or conditioning something that should not be conditioned because it's just too beyond the scope of what you can even imagine.
Why do they call it good and not like neutral or something?
Well, I think because everything that I just described. So if you look up the Greek, it's literally like the words for the idea of the good is the direct Greek. So I guess you would have to make a fundamental choice and you would have to distinguish with what good is. I mean, to me, and I think to a Platonist, good is harmony. Good is order. Good is justice. Good is virtue, right?
Yeah.
And by the fact that these things exist, like all throughout the scope of the cosmos, right? Like, is there order amongst the planets? Yes. Is there order amongst the elements? Yes. Is there order behind everything?
Right.
There is. And I think that that's good. And the Platonists thought it was good too. So it's logical, therefore, to assume that if goodness exists in this overarching multitude that covers all of reality with order, with laws, with the ability to understand, then that's a good thing. And that good thing is imbued in everything, and it also must precede everything. And this is kind of the proof, by the way. There's a very, very famous proof that a lot of religious people use that's essentially sourced from Aristotle, and it's like this it's an ontological proof, but a lot of people call it like the unmoved mover. And you can logically very quickly see that it's irrational to assume that there's any kind of infinite regress into infinity, and that everything must have this starting point. Right. And that starting point is this idea of the good. But then the mistake very religious people make is when they try to make that thing their God, there's all these problems that start to emerge. Like, well, why doesn't your God do this then? Why doesn't your God do that? And the problem is what you're trying to do is you're trying to give too many attributes to this thing. Yeah. And when you start trying to give it too many attributes, then then you can make absurd arguments like, no, that thing's actually evil. Which people love to do, right? Like that's the whole Gnostic, it's a version of Gnosticism at least. But,
well, I got a quick question. So like a scientifically minded person in today's day and age assumes that this whole universe is because of the Big Bang. Is this their way of calling the Big Bang the form of the good? Maybe you could look at it like that. I mean, order has come out of the Big Bang. I don't know if there was. I feel like I've heard like there was like chaos for a long time, but then like somehow order started. Maybe it was the form of the good that started the order, and it's not the Big Bang itself.
I think you could make that argument. I mean, they were monists, so they believed that there was a fundamental unity underlying reality. So they call that thing Tohen, like the one. And I'm pretty sure, I think there is a little bit of dispute amongst some of the Platonists with this idea, but I'm pretty sure the form of the good and the one are the same thing. So if you assume that there is this thing that has always existed, and you cannot say too much about it, but you can say that it's good, then I think you could reduce that to even beyond the Big Bang, right? Because the Big Bang is like the start of physical reality. It's like, how did the universe gain its shape? Why didn't it just fly apart into a billion pieces that didn't yield any laws? And I mean, again, you're back to like, because there's something imbued within reality that is steering some level of what they would say telos.
Is the form of the good intelligence?
I think it's the reason intelligence can exist.
Because there seems to be an inherent intelligence of the universe.
Yes,
to me, and that the universe relies on it.
It's the precondition for intelligence, but intelligence itself, if you think about it, is a relative thing, right? Because to have intelligence, it's all about discernment, right? It's understanding this equation gives me this. When I go that way, I'll get to my destiny. It's all this relative thing, right? Yeah. So I mean, just to look at this is their metaphysical understanding. It's like you have this transcendent mystery, the one, the form of the good. Then you have this realm of nous or the divine mind. Within that, you get immortal truths, mathematics, harmonics, geometry, things that will be true way after you're dead and were true way before you were born. And to ascribe time to them is absurd. Like what time is 1 + 1? You know, it's like, it's an absurd question. It's 1 + 1 is 2. It doesn't matter, like whatever.
Right.
What time is a triangle? You know, these are things that exist beyond that scope. So that's what I mean when I say it's the reason intelligence can exist. It's the conceptual. Well, the form of the good isn't even the conceptual framework, but anything that works and adheres to logic and describes the world to a degree is imbued with whatever that mystery is, right? Because it does work, and because it does lead you back to the horizon of that mystery eventually.
Right. Interesting. I recall when I did a little bit of research on this, I think they used an example of the fact that a horse can exist is because there's some perfect form of a horse.
Right.
Is that the archetype of the horse?
Yeah, it's the same idea. So eidos is the Greek word, which is like, that's where we get idea from. But Jung himself likens archetypes to eidos. So Jung says, like when Jung is talking about the idea of archetypes, he says it is the Platonic eidos. He says that it's the same thing. So yes. So yeah, so their idea is that anything that exists, right, had a sort of perfect conceptual version of itself before it came into being. It didn't just emerge from the ground up in the way that we're so used to thinking of, like, an organism comes together cell by cell by cell by cell and evolves and evolves and evolves until it's like whatever it is.
Yeah, a platypus.
And to a Platonist, yes, it would look like that. It would look like that. But that is not the terminus. Like, that is not the truth of where it comes from. The truth of where it comes from is it already existed in some kind of template. It already existed in some kind of conscious, intelligible state. And I'm really excited, by the way, I'm doing a episode soon with this guy named Michael Levin, who's a professor at Tufts. And he's a biologist who he became fascinated with the bioelectric layer of cells and of organisms. And basically what it boils down to is there are all of these self-arranging intelligences that we don't understand where they come from. And he himself has started to use the word Platonism at times because he runs, like, doing experiments, it becomes clear to him that there's some kind of template that's being carried out by some intelligence. And the intelligences are like little microscopic beings, right? That are doing the stuff, that are like emitting the electrical signals and do, like, the amino acids involved in all of this shit. It's like an intelligence that's way too big for these little guys running around making it happen. So where is it coming from, right? Like, what is the template that they're executing? And he has all these reasons for going beyond the genetic code. It's not that either. It's technical, and I actually need to, like, learn more about it before I talk to him. But that's the idea, is that in some sense that horse exists as an immortal concept, and each horse down here is like a reflection of that immortal concept. It's interesting.
Yeah. So is it the form of the good shining on that immortal concept, like the horse, like the perfect version of the horse is able to exist because of the form of the good?
Yeah, I mean that would be
it's like the battery, or like the undercurrent.
Yeah, that'd be the undercurrent of everything, right? That's a good way to think about it. The overcurrent, undercurrent. There's no, it's pre-concept, right? So it's like, how do you can't put it in a place? It's pre-place, it's pre-anything, and then you have to start conditioning off of it, right? And there's many other thinkers that are monists who are not Platonists that come up with a similar idea independently, that there is some kind of underlying unity and then some kind of underlying logic that comes right off of that thing, that everything then behaves according to or in line with.
I really wonder if the concept of God is reliant on the form of the good, or is it above it, or is it the same thing?
It completely this is the problem, is like, what does God mean? It's like it's
like the all-encompassing fabric of reality.
Then yes. Yeah, then I think they're the same thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a different way to find God,
Yeah, and they use, the Platonists, are absolutely not atheists. Like they're saying theos, they're saying Greek words that mean God or gods all the time. Plotinus talks about God all the time. He's like the most famous quote unquote Neoplatonist, which really just means he's a later Platonist who's very mystical, and he is trying to be with the one. He's trying to go as deep into consciousness as he possibly can to return to this immortal realm of forms and eventually the one. And he does he achieves a vision of it and achieves a union, a henosis with that thing.
Have you heard trip reports about people doing 5-MeO DMT?
Yes. So I know where you're going with this, and it does very much sound like a reintegration with that unity. Yeah.
Are they finding the form of the good? They don't know that,
right?
But
I think it's like, possible. Yeah, for sure.
The words they come back with, like the source of all. Yes. It's like maybe they're finding the form of the good, and maybe Plato got hit with a toe. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But also the idea that that this brings in so many, like, Eleusis, like Eleusinian Mysteries, all this other stuff. We don't know what they were doing in terms of like techniques, or they make it pretty clear they're not just doing like didactic big brain logic thinking. They're doing a lot of that, to be sure. Like they thought math was important. They thought understanding music was important. They thought, all of these things were giving you real insights into divinity, like into aspects of divinity. And this is why polytheism is just so important, by the way, because when you try to reduce everything down into one divinity, you're trying to just like push so many concepts together that it starts to feel beyond the scope of the mind to understand. And then what do you do? Okay, well, we'll have an angel that's responsible for this, and an angel it's the same thing. You're just demoting it to a lower divinity. The Greeks didn't care about that because there wasn't this like weird stigma against saying I'm a polytheist. So it's just whatever.
Remind me what polytheist means. I think I know.
Multiple gods.
Multiple gods.
Poly, multiple, right. Theos. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So
and that's why the Hindus have multiple gods, because it's just, it's like, and then for all of them too, there's still this thing that's above all of those gods, right? There's the form of the good, or Tohen, or the one.
Absolutely.
Or Brahman, right? Brahman is like I believe would be like the Hindu equivalent to the same concept, where it's just like this unitive divine force of goodness that is like behind everything.
Right. Well, the concept's interesting to me about the 5-MeO experience, because a lot of people kind of dislike, or at least a bad taste in their mouth about how people speak about 5-MeO, because it belittles all other psychedelic experiences and experiences generally. If these people are right, and it is really beyond all of these things, like it's beyond even what the Eleusinian Mysteries could have contained, because those, as far as we know, were mushroom based or ergot based, LSD based.
That's a theory. Yes, that's a theory.
And LSD can get you into some dreamy ass places, but I don't know that it takes you to the source, meaning the form of the good.
I think it's, even as a fellow psychonaut, I think it's a mistake to think that we can understand whatever was going on at Eleusis. Like, even if there was a psychedelic component, which I think is very possible, I think the idea that it's like, oh, they're just going there and then they're eating mushrooms and having a trip, I think that's belittling the experience by...
Oh, for sure.
By a mile. Yeah.
I understand that was ritual and...
months of preparation, like...
Right.
It's an intense... And also you got to think about that you're living in the framework where you're not... like, even if there was a psychoactive component to it, you're not living in the mindset that I'm going to go to this place and eat mushrooms and like trip, you're literally going to see the goddess. And it's not a like metaphor. It's the goddess is there and I'm going to be with her.
Right.
And then there were people who, and it wasn't everyone apparently, by the way. And not everyone could go have the inner mystery. Like it was only a small subset of the people. Like they had to be chosen by the like top person. Like he would have to be like, okay, you're capable of this. Like everybody else, try again next year or whatever. So these people would get handpicked, and then they would go into the central mystery. And then even apparently some of them didn't get the visit. So it's like, that could be a psychedelic thing, right? It could be like, you had a bad batch, or you had a whatever, or who knows? But
right.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a lot. I mean, yeah.
One reason I think it was psychedelic based is that psychedelics put you in a state of susceptibility to suggestion. And if you say you're going to meet the goddess, or even she's here now.
Yeah, but
that can make it come on. It's weird. Like I haven't seen things until someone next to me told me what they're seeing. You know,
but if that's true, everybody would get whatever their intention is in psychedelics, and that has not been my experience. Like,
well, are they disciplined enough to call back to it? It's a challenge.
Like, I mean, when you're doing a heroic dose or something, I feel like you can have setting matters for sure, but I think you can have all the intentions in the world, and the experience is still just going to be what it's going to be. Like, it's not going to be. You could be in a super, and I've been in this state where I'm just like super positive, you know, like ready to just have a great experience. And it's like, how about you go to hell? Like, I know you've had that experience. You've had that experience.
Well, because it says, who are you to want to come here and control anything? Because you're a little old you. And this is grand consciousness.
Yeah.
This is God consciousness, or I don't know what it is, but it's
more.
Yeah.
It's
and
definitely
more.
more.
And it is kind of like, who are you to come here with the questions? It's like, we tell you, you don't tell us or ask us.
I agree.
And that's the humbling part. We come back, we're like, whoa, okay, my bad, you know, like shit.
Right. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting that the source of the universe kind of seems to be the form of the good. People can experience it. They just, you know, probably never read Plato, and they just come back saying it's all love, it's all light.
Right. Yeah. And but it is. Yeah.
And it could be that though, the form of the good. Yeah.
And Plato says it's all love too, actually. Like he in the Symposium, they're talking about, you know, what is Eros, what is beauty? And they all give their speeches. And then at the very end, basically, you know, it's long and but Socrates describes Eros or love as this interconnecting force, basically, that underlies reality and brings everything together. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, I think I understand it now, you know, like I heard you talk about it a couple of times. Well, at least, you know, a better idea. And it always intrigued me because,
if people want a deeper dive into this, you really should check out the Plato's Cave, because it all leads into like this discussion about the form of the good, kicks off this whole thing that eventually goes into the Plato's Cave allegory. And I cover all this stuff in my Plato's Cave video, and then I take it further and riff off of like what some of the conclusions you can draw from it and stuff like that too. But
beautiful. I just want to ask you, because it is in a kind of a short 5-minute spiel here. People are seeing like orbs recently. People are seeing drones. People are seeing crazy stuff in the sky. There's a lot of speculation as to what it is, why they're actually reporting on it in the news instead of trying to cover it up.
Yeah.
I kind of have this theory, and I think I might have heard other people reinforcing this, that it's kind of like a soft launch of how does the public respond when
Right.
unexplainable phenomena is in the sky a lot. Let's gather the data, and it'll help us inform how to go about, I think it's called disclosure, where it's like, yeah, aliens are here, guys. Like, it's for real now. It's like, I know we've been like soft launching this shit for a decade, but like, it's 100% true. So I'm just curious, like, what's your thoughts on it? Because it's such a hot topic right now.
Yeah, no, I've been obsessed with it, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. I think that scenario that you just outlined there is probably something that a lot of people are considering. I'm definitely considering it. The idea that these could be drones that are trying to obscure something else that's going on up there, like, okay, there's something we don't want people to see. Let's obscure it with like all of this junk like that. That's a potential. The idea of what you're saying of a psyop, that's sort of just a study on what people's reaction is. I think that's a definite possibility. I also, though, think, and this is where, you could accuse me of being a skeptic again, everybody's own sighting, you can't take 1,000 sightings and put them all on equal footing, right? Like, some people are not seeing anything weird. Some people are, like, there was just a case where some mayor or something thought there were drones above his house, but it was like the fucking constellation Orion, right? Like, in these states, people's own perception can play tricks on them. And I don't dismiss public, barometers either. Like, I totally believe that most people know exactly what the fuck they're seeing, and there is a lot of extra weird shit going on. But I'm just trying to say that it all takes nuance, and there is this whole storyline that people's imaginations start to feed into. Jung wrote a whole book on UFOs, and he has a lot of really massively insightful things to say on this note, basically, that people are going to project their own narratives onto the unknown. And when you have unknown things going on, it's going to absorb everybody's shadow material. It's going to absorb everybody's savior complexes, where they think that this is like God coming to save them or aliens coming to save, right? But all of that said, something's going on. Like, some weird shit is going on. And I don't know what it is. If I had to guess, it seems like there's clearly a human origin behind most of whatever's going on. I have seen videos where it looks like there's a drone and an orb, which makes it look like, okay, maybe this is one of these things where they're trying to obscure that other thing. To make matters more complicated, when you take a camera and you see a light and you focus in on the light, it looks like a big blown out thing a lot of the time. And a lot of people who don't know anything about photography would look at that and be like, that's an orb. But unless you're there and you know what you're seeing, like, I'm uncomfortable thinking every image that I see on the internet that looks like an orb is a real orb, know? So it's complicated, man. And I think we're living in one of the most difficult chapter of the meaning crisis so far. It's just been one layer after another, and it's not going to get any easier. And I'm not going to stop paying attention, that's for sure. But I'm also realistic enough to know, like, I got to stay rooted in what I can control and play with this stuff as fun and speculate about the conspiracies and shit, because I do think that's completely possible. But at the same time, keep feet on the ground, tend to the part of the garden you can touch and all that shit. So yeah, mixed feelings. Well,
I believe in aliens for the fact that just the possibility, given the amount of galaxies that we've discovered.
Of course, yeah.
I don't know if you ever saw the model by, I think his name's like Spaceman or something on YouTube, where he filled a pull-up with essentially like Cheerio sized galaxies. Like, imagine a galaxy is the size of a Cheerio or like a Fruit Loop, and he filled a gigantic pull-up with them and said, this is like what we've discovered through telescopes, let alone what
Totally.
more exists. So given that amount of galaxies, man, there's fucking no way life doesn't exist. And the fact that time is so long, I feel like they could develop the technology to be able to pass through light speed. So for those reasons, I haven't met aliens other than in my dreams. I've rarely seen UFOs. I've seen maybe 2 or 3 that were like, that looks like one, but I'm not fully convinced. But I hope to see it. I hope to see it. Do you believe in aliens?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the same point that you make is a very just strong point in that we got to be pretty fucking solipsistic to think that we're the only intelligent life-bearing planet for sure. But I also think that there's plenty of reasons, many of them we talked about in this podcast, to think that there might be other kinds of intelligent life that are already here, man. Already other kinds of non-human intelligence that have been here, are here. Maybe they're material, maybe they're not material. Maybe they're consciousness-based. Maybe they're trans medium, so they're like can materialize or not materialize. Like,
yeah.
And to think that that's more outlandish than some like little guy from another planet like drove really fast to get here, like to me that they don't seem, one doesn't sound necessarily more likely than the other to me. Like they both sound perfectly possible.
Same. I agree. Well, we'll see where this DMTx stuff goes, and if they can,
right? Yeah,
they can get some. Oh, we found them.
Right. Like I mean, like Gallimore, the famous neuropharmacologist, DMT.
He's awesome.
Orator said to me, like, DMT is alien disclosure.
Yeah, I agree. So it feels real when you're there. It feels realer than real.
Yeah.
So I love it, man. Well, thank you so much for your time, dude. Always great chatting. It's an honor. And if you want to shout out where people can find you, we'll wrap it up.
Just look up Third Eye Drops. You'll find it. I'm primarily doing YouTube stuff, but it's an audio pod too.
Nice. Excellent. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you once again, Michael, for being here, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Yeah. Much love, everybody.
Much love.